My next guests have been reporting and speaking out on the plight of Christians in Iraq and the Middle East for many years. They're here tonight to discuss the current state of the ancient Christian community of Iraq, 20 years after the U.S.-led invasion. Rome correspondent for the National Catholic Register, Edward Pentin, and founder of Nazarene.org, Father Benedict Kiely, who joins us from our D.C. studio. Thank you both for being here. Edward, I want to begin with a piece you wrote this week on the Iraqi Christian struggle to endure 20 years of Operation Iraqi Freedom. You write that some analysts have traced the catastrophe indicated, or inflicted rather, on Iraqi Christians, especially by ISIS, on the formal disbandment of the Iraqi army, which was a decision made 20 years ago by that Coalition Provisional Authority, basically an arm of the U.S. State Department. Do you believe that analysis, and how did that decision impact the Christian population in Iraq?
Well, this is a contentious point, Raymond, because the person who implemented that order, Paul Bremer, who was President Bush's appointed head of state of Iraq after the invasion, he gave that order, and he says that the order actually they shouldn't have used the word to disband the army because the army was already disbanded. And in fact, he says that after there was some personnel changes, that Donald Rumsfeld was sacked and other people, that actually they managed to win the war against al-Qaeda. But it was when the troops were withdrawn, the US troops were withdrawn from Iraq in 2011, that it created a power vacuum that was then filled by ISIS. And so he says that it was that decision which actually led to ISIS taking over and persecuting Christians. But this is a debatable point. There's been others who say that it was actually because that the army disbanded, whether it was because of the order or not, it was the fact that it was disbanded led to this power vacuum after the invasion. But he insists that it happened later, after 2011.
Father Kiely, you have spent a great deal of time in Iraq. In 2003, the Christian population was 1.5 million people. Today, there are 200,000 Christians that remain. Give me a sense of what's happened to the Christians there. Where have most of them gone? And what is the current state of the Christians who remained behind?
Well, if we were members of the World Wildlife Fund and we'd heard that an animal population had decreased from 1.5 million to 200,000, and now the Iraqi bishops are working on a prospective number of 50,000 Christians, there would be, if Iraqi Christians were frogs or toads, there'd be a worldwide outcry about this. This is what has happened. The Christian population has been decimated. There's a remnant, a true biblical word, there's a remnant left, but you speak to any Iraqi Christian from the highest to the lowest, and they put all the blame on the invasion in 2003. And as you remember, Raymond, not to inflate your ego, but you were one of the people 20 years ago, one of the few speaking against it, along with our beloved late Holy Father John Paul II. He warned, he prophesied exactly what would happen, and this is what has happened to the Iraqi Christian population now.
Yeah, Father Kiely, Iraq's bishops are predicting the number of Christians could fall to 50,000. Iraqi Christians are really on the brink of extinction. That's what that number means. What does the international community need to do to bring more attention to this situation? Can anything be done at this point?
Well, it's easy to feel depressed and to feel that there's nothing that can be done. And without wanting to be over-pious, for us believers, for Christians, prayer. But that may seem obvious, but unfortunately, we know in the West that prayer for the persecuted is often put into the intercessions at Mass once a month, maybe, but it's not an urgency. If we look at the Acts of the Apostles, the church, we're told in the Acts of the Apostles, when St. Peter was arrested, prayed constantly. One of the things my little charity is doing is trying to put a little icon of Our Blessed Lady, Mother of the Persecuted, into churches so that bishops will highlight this. But you know, Raymond, the strange thing is we give this icon, and I've had bishops refuse. They'd prefer me to have an exhibit about global warming, but persecuted Christians seems to be a problem. But prayer, advocacy, speaking to your elected representatives, and aid, practical aid, is the community will last now. but they have been decimated, all because of this invasion.
Yeah, Father, I remember when the invasion was about to happen, hadn't happened yet, and I had a Chaldean bishop on or two, and many members of the Bush administration contacted me and were very upset because these bishops were worried about the invasion and the impact it would have on what is the cradle of Christianity in the Middle East. It was one of the vibrant communities of Christianity, and certainly Catholics. Edward, Iraq's government today is heavily influenced by Iran. There are security concerns, very few job opportunities. What sort of hope is there among the younger generations in Iraq today to remain there? I mean, this is something you see also in the Palestinian territories and in Israel as well. The Christians feel, well, there's no future here and there are no numbers, I've got to get out.
Right, exactly. Well, I remember when I was with Father Benedict, we both went back in 2018 and we met some young people in Iraq, and they really are very desperate in the sense that many of them are unemployed, they can't find work. There's also the security issue, which is constant. There are constant concerns about security. But the unemployment and training and education is a real problem for them still. But there are signs of hope. There is, in Erbil, for example, there's a new university, the Catholic University of Erbil, which was set up with the help of the Italian Bishops' Conference. And that's providing education for, I think, something like 406 students so far. But they're doing very well, and they've got a broad number of students, mostly Catholic, but also some Muslims as well, and some Yazidis. And so it's a very positive, hopeful sign, that university. And it's really thanks to Archbishop Bashar Warder of Erbil, who has helped push that forward. So there are signs of hope, but it's still a very desperate situation for young people especially.
Father, in 2021, Pope Francis visited Iraq. He brought a lot of attention to the plight of Christians living there. It was a beautiful visit. Is the Vatican doing enough in the wake of that visit now to bring attention to this persecuted community in Iraq and really throughout the Middle East? It's far more than just Iraq.
It's true, the visit of Pope Francis was greatly appreciated. It did give them a sense that they were not forgotten. They felt very forgotten for a long time. It's over now. I was in Mosul just in January. There are still pictures of Francis everywhere, but the attention of the world obviously is in Ukraine, but also the terrible persecution which needs to be highlighted in Africa, in Nigeria. There's always a sense that they've been forgotten. I would just encourage people to remember, as you said, that it's the cradle of Christianity, it's our roots. When you cut the roots away from a tree, the entire tree is in danger.
I want to move on to a few other countries in the Middle East. Father Kiely, in a recent interview, you said that the situation in Syria is appalling, and, quote, everyone is short of everything. There have been heavy sanctions placed on Syria by the U.S., by the EU. What effects are these sanctions having on Christians in the country?
All Syrians are suffering. I'll give you a little anecdote. I was in Syria in October of 2019. It's very difficult to get into as a Westerner, but there are a lot of cats. The Arabs like cats. They don't really like dogs, but they like cats. There are a lot of cats being fed. And I heard a story recently, there are no cats, or hardly any cats left in Damascus because they were fed the scraps, obviously. There are no scraps to feed them. The international sanctions, obviously aimed at the Assad regime, were meant to destroy the Assad regime. But the fact is the three great patriarchs of Damascus have all asked now twice for these sanctions to be lifted because the people are suffering. No food, no medicine, no heating. It's absolutely tragic. And the Christian community, Pentecost Sunday is this weekend. We hear in that reading, which readers often make quite a mess of when they read it, about the Parthians and the Medes and the Elamites, and the Syrians were there at the beginning of the church. Once again, if we don't care about our brethren who are suffering, who've given us so much, we didn't bring the gospel to them, they brought the gospel to us. We must care. We must be passionate.
Yeah, it amazes me the kind of disregard we have for these. These are really the ancient communities of Christianity. These are your forefathers in the faith, and we sort of just put them out of mind and don't think about them. Many Syrians, Father and Ed, fled to Lebanon for refuge at the start of the war. Now that country is suffering from a failed state, economic collapse. Christians in Lebanon make up about 32% of the population. However, Lebanon is now facing a mass exodus due to the current situation. What do you foresee happening to the Lebanese Christian population? That I'll let you start.
Yes, well, I think it's the case all across the Middle East. The Christians are suffering from this, and it's a general, seem to be growing instability across the region. And this, of course, was predicted, as we all remember, back in 2003. I remember asking somebody when I worked at Vatican Radio, do you think this invasion will open a Pandora's box in the Arab world? And of course, many denied it, those who were sympathetic to the war. But many of us, I think, could foresee this happening. And I think we're now reaping the fruits of it. I think in the end, the war seems to have caused instability across the region. And we're sort of witnessing the fruits of that.
Mm. Father, friends of mine did fundraisers for the Christian community in Lebanon that really is, again, under enormous pressure because they're not only having to deal with their own internal problems, they're absorbing Christians coming in from Iraq and other regions. What is the future there? I mean, this is probably now the largest Christian population in the Middle East.
Egypt is the largest still, but yes,
okay.
the situation in Lebanon is a disaster. It's as you described, a failed state. I was there in June last year. Again, it's easy to become depressed. The Lebanese Christians are very tough, though. That's one of the things. I spoke to a Lebanese Christian politician, and he said, unlike in some places, he said, we will fight to the death if it comes to that. But it's off the map. It's not being talked about. It's very worrying. I think politically, people should be aware, the political pundits should be aware that this is all about Iran as well. The Shia crescent all the way from Tehran to Beirut. The influence of Iran is terribly, terribly worrying. They're taking over that whole area. Iraq almost feels like being in an occupied country now, and it's the same for Lebanon.
Right. Yeah, and in Palestine, Christians in the West Bank have been reduced from 18% to 1% in the last 70 years. The number of Palestinian Christians have dropped from 15 to 2%. Most of that decline is attributed to a hostile political environment, lack of employment opportunities again. What are the bishops, Ed, church leaders, various Christian faiths, what are they doing to try to keep Christians from leaving that territory? I mean, look, I will, in full disclosure, I'm a member of the Franciscan Foundation for the Holy Land, which labors to create both housing and economic and educational opportunities for the few Christians in that land. Who else is doing anything here?
Well, I think it is left largely to the church, and I think many people see that the church is really the only entity in the Middle East and in the Holy Land especially that can bring these sides together and to bring peace to the region. And I remember when I was writing for a publication on the Holy Land that it was often initiatives from the church, especially the Franciscans in the Holy Land, who were doing this work and trying to bring the sides together. But it's extremely hard, of course, and it's this constant, intractable conflict that never seems to be able to be solved. But at least you have these relative periods where there is peace. But I think we're seeing a sort of uptick, it seems, in growing tensions over there.
Well, and the, I guess, de facto withdrawal of the United States from the Middle East, which has happened over the last few years, has created greater instability. The coming together, who would have ever imagined that we'd see Saudi Arabia and Iran coming together? But that's the situation as we see it today. Father Kiely, the organization that you founded, Nazarene.org, it works to bring aid to persecuted Christians. And as you mentioned earlier, you've started this Icon project, where you bring Mary, Mother of Persecuted Christians to parishes around the world and churches around the world, really to focus people on the constant prayer needed for the persecuted community. And I'm going to share some of this. You've established shrines in New York, London, Clinton, Massachusetts. All of these have been established with the support of the local bishop. You'll be installing a new shrine in Sweden this summer. How did that project come about?
Well, it's as I said earlier, Raymond, it's very important that the church is praying for the persecuted. And I particularly want that any priest could say, I'd have an icon in my church, and that's great. But we want the bishop to say, this matters to me, this matters to my diocese. So we want the bishop to bless it and designate either his cathedral or a church in his diocese, so that he's showing his people that prayer for the persecuted is important. Cardinal Arborelius, Sweden has a very large diaspora of Iraqi, Palestinian, and Syrian Christians, I think more than 200,000. And so Cardinal Arborelius, the cardinal in Sweden, has agreed to bless this icon. It'll be the first in Western Europe, again, as a symbol of prayer. So any bishop, Raymond, any bishop friend of yours, if he wants an icon, we'll bring it. There's no cost, but we want to show all the things we've been talking about over these minutes can depress people greatly. We believe that prayer will change a lot if we pray.
And what kind of response have you seen to the erection of these shrines?
Wonderful. We had the first in Clinton, Massachusetts. We also premiered the first Mass written in the world by Paul Jernberg, the Catholic composer, a Mass for persecuted Christians. Absolutely beautiful. I believe EWTN will be showing it at some point. A beautiful Mass in English, and the people were just overwhelmed. Everyone who was there described it as an extraordinary experience, and it triggers then that interest, that inquiry. It's just a small thing, Raymond, but small is beautiful.
No, small things done with great love, as Mother Teresa used to say. Finally, Ed, I want to switch gears just moments before that I have with you here. Days before the first version of those synodal documents we've been awaiting emerge, the Pope spoke to those running the Italian synodal process. And in an address, he urged them, I just read this today, he urged them to be a restless church, one that rejects what he called, quote, the self-referential theology of the mirror. How is all this, do you think, how is it being received in Rome? And how are people in general viewing this synod?
Well, do you mean the Italian synod? Because there are so many going on at the moment. But yes, the Italian
well, the
synod,
global and the Italian. Yes.
Well, the Italian one has been on the cards for a while, but the Italian bishops didn't, as I understand it, weren't too keen on the idea, and so it was delayed for quite a while. But now it's getting underway. Of course, we've now got the German synod, and we've got other ones too. But I think the general sense, I think, is a certain weariness about these synods, that it's all seems to be all about discussing and actually, for all the talk about the Pope not wanting to have a self-referential church, I think a lot of people feel that these synods actually do cause the church to be self-referential, because it tends to bring in a lot of sort of politics and ideology, and actually gets people looking inward rather than outward. Now, of course, the long-term goal is, of course, to try to help the church to evangelize through these synods. But I think certainly it seems the short-term result of these meetings is a sort of inward-looking church, and one that gets all very much more tense and conflicting.
Yeah, we will get into more of this in the days ahead, but I was sort of interested when I read the Holy Father's comments there. He tried to create a lineage, if you will, of these synods, and he said, look, Paul VI instituted these, and every 4 years there's been a synod. But those were synods of bishops, with bishops voting. This is a very different varietal, if you will, in that it's been opened up now to lay people voting and really the whole world having input, and non-believers and believers. This is a very different flavor and scope than I think Paul VI or the fathers of the Second Vatican Council might have imagined. But we will leave it there. Father Benedict Kiely, Edward Pentin, thank you both for being here. Ed's book, The Next Pope, The Leading Cardinals, or leading cardinal candidates, rather.
Thank you.
Father Benedict Kiely's ministry, by the way, can be found at Nazarene.org. Thank you both.